I'm 89 years old, and there's a sentence I've been carrying around in my chest for more than 60 years. It's strange the way life works. When you're young, you think regret comes from the big things, the mistakes, the arguments, the decisions that go wrong. But when you get to my age, you start to realize some of the heaviest regrets come from something much quieter, from words you never said. My name isn't important. What matters is that I've lived a long American life. I raised kids, worked a steady job for 40 years, paid my bills, fixed the house, tried to be a decent man. From the outside, most people would probably say I had a normal life, and in many ways, I did. But there's one memory that has followed me through every decade since I was a young man. A moment that shows up in my mind at the strangest times, sitting in a quiet room, driving down the road, or lying awake at night when the house is silent. It's the day my father died. You see, my father and I were the kind of men who didn't talk much about feelings. In those days, fathers and sons didn't sit down and have long emotional conversations. We worked, we nodded, we respected each other, and somehow we just assumed the other person understood. I always believed there would be more time to say the things that felt a little uncomfortable, more time to tell him something simple that had been sitting in my mind for years. But life has a way of closing doors without warning, and the truth is, the one thing I wish I had told my father was something so small, most people would think it hardly mattered at all. I grew up in a small American town back in the 1940s. It was the kind of place where everybody knew each other's names, and most fathers worked the same job for 20 or 30 years without complaining. My father was that kind of man. He worked long days with his hands, up before the sun most mornings, coffee in a thick white mug, boots already by the door. I remember the sound of those boots more than anything, heavy steps across the kitchen floor while the rest of us were still waking up. He wasn't the kind of father who talked a lot. Back then, most men weren't. They didn't say, "I love you." They didn't sit down and explain their feelings. Love was something they showed through work, through fixing things around the house, through making sure the lights stayed on and food stayed on the table. And in his own way, my father did all of that. When I was a boy, we spent time together without saying very much. He'd have me hold the flashlight while he worked on the car. Sometimes we'd fix a fence in the yard or patch something around the house. Most of the time, the only sounds were tools clinking and the wind moving through the trees. But I always felt proud standing there beside him. As I got older, life started moving the way it does for most young men. I left home, found steady work, and eventually got married. My wife and I built a life together, raised children, paid the mortgage, and tried to do things the right way. Years passed faster than I expected. I'd still see my father from time to time. Sunday dinners, holidays, the occasional visit when work allowed it. Our conversations were always polite, simple. We talked about the weather, the kids, the house, whatever needed fixing, but never about deeper things. And every once in a while, driving home from one of those visits, I'd think about something I wanted to tell him, something I had felt for a long time. The problem was, I always assumed there would be another visit, another Sunday, another chance. The day everything changed started like any other weekday. I was at work, going through the usual routine, papers on the desk, a cup of coffee getting cold beside me. Nothing unusual about the morning at all. Life felt normal, steady, predictable, the way it usually does before something important happens. Then the phone rang. Back in those days, getting a phone call in the middle of the workday usually meant something wasn't right. I remember picking up the receiver and hearing my mother's voice on the other end. But it didn't sound like her. It sounded smaller somehow, fragile. She told me my father had collapsed that morning. They had called an ambulance, But by the time they reached the hospital, he was already gone. I remember sitting there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the wall in front of me. My mind couldn't quite catch up with what I had just heard. It didn't feel real. My father had always been the strongest man I knew, the kind of man who woke up before everyone else and worked harder than anyone around him. Men like that weren't supposed to just disappear in the middle of an ordinary morning. I drove to the hospital in a kind of quiet fog. The whole way there, my mind kept reaching for something to hold on to. Maybe the doctor was wrong. Maybe they had made a mistake. Maybe he'd wake up. But deep down, I think I already knew. When I arrived, my mother was sitting in a chair outside the room. I'll never forget the look in her eyes. She didn't even have to say anything. I walked into that room and saw my father lying there, still and quiet in a way I had never seen before. And that's when it hit me. There would be no more Sunday visits, no more small conversations about the weather, no more chances to say the things I have been putting off for years. Standing there beside that hospital bed, I started remembering every moment I had thought about telling him how much I appreciated him, how much respect I had for the man he was. All the times I told myself, I'll say it next time. The truth is, there wasn't going to be a next time. And in that moment, I realized something that has followed me for the rest of my life. Some doors in life close without warning, and once they do, no amount of wishing can open them again. After my father passed, life kept moving the way life always does. The funeral came and went. Friends brought food to the house. Family members said kind things about the kind of man he had been. Strong, reliable, the kind of father people respected. And they were right. But while everyone else slowly returned to their normal routines, something inside me stayed unsettled. For a long time, I kept replaying small memories in my head. Moments that probably meant nothing to anyone else, but meant everything to me. I'd remember standing in the garage with him while he worked on the car, the way he'd hand me a wrench without saying much, the quiet nod when a job was finished. Little pieces of time that didn't seem important when they were happening. Now they felt heavy. What stayed with me most wasn't something he did wrong. It was something I never did. I never told him how much I respected the way he lived his life. I never told him that the older I got, the more I realized how hard he worked for our family. And I never said the simplest thing a son can say to his father: thank you. At first, I tried to push those thoughts away. I told myself that men from our generation didn't talk like that. Fathers and sons showed respect through actions, not words. That's what I kept telling myself. But the truth is, excuses don't quiet a regret once it settles into your heart. Years passed. I had children of my own, and I tried my best to be a good father to them. But sometimes I caught myself repeating the same habits I grew up with, staying quiet when I should have spoken, assuming people understood how I felt without me actually saying it. Every once in a while, I'd visit my father's grave, usually on a quiet afternoon when no one else was around. I'd stand there for a few minutes, thinking about the things I wish I had said when he could still hear them. And the strange thing about regret is, time doesn't erase it. You learn to live with it, but it never fully leaves. When you reach 89 years old, you spend a lot of time looking backward. Not in a sad way necessarily, just thoughtful. You start connecting pieces of your life that didn't make much sense when you were younger. And one thing I've realized after all these decades is that love in families is often assumed, but not always spoken. In my father's generation, men believed their responsibility was to provide. If the house was warm, the bills were paid, and the children had what they needed, that was their way of saying, I care about you. My father lived exactly that way. And for most of my life, I believed that meant words didn't matter much. I figured he already knew what I felt, just like I believed I understood him. But time has a way of teaching you what really matters. The truth is, appreciation has a strange habit of getting postponed. We think we'll say it next Christmas, next visit, next Sunday dinner. Life always feels like it's giving us another opportunity, until suddenly it isn't. Over the years, I've realized that the words I never said to my father were not complicated words. They weren't dramatic or poetic. They were simple. I wanted to tell him that the older I got, the more I respected him, that I understood the sacrifices he made for our family, that the way he lived his life quietly shaped the man I eventually became, and most of all, I wanted to say thank you. But wisdom sometimes arrives long after the moment where it would have mattered most. That's one of the strange things about getting old. You learn the right words after the person who needed to hear them is already gone. If you're watching this and you're somewhere between 30 and 65 years old, there's something I want to tell you. Right now, somewhere in your life, there's probably a person you assume understands how you feel about them. Maybe it's your father, maybe your mother, maybe someone who quietly stood beside you while you were growing up. And you might be thinking the same thing I once thought. I'll say it someday. But let me tell you something an old man learns after living nearly 90 years. Someday has a habit of disappearing. Life moves fast when you're busy building it. You're working, raising children, paying bills, trying to keep everything together. Years pass before you even notice they're gone. And the people who were once always there slowly grow older. I'm not telling you to have some dramatic conversation. It doesn't have to be complicated. Sometimes the most meaningful things in life are the simplest. A phone call, a quiet moment. Just letting someone know you see what they did for you and that it mattered. Because once that door closes, once that person is gone, you can carry love in your heart forever, but you can't give it to them anymore. If I had just one more minute with my father, I wouldn't say anything fancy. I'd simply look at him and say the words I should have said all those years ago. Dad, thank you. And if there's someone in your life who deserves to hear something like that, don't wait as long as I did.